What is up, everybody? My name is JDog1025FTW, and you are about to see how much the average Joe makes in Oblivion, Skyrim, and convert it into USD using a complex and special series of calculations developed by the CIA, I think? Now guys, before you continue, I would like to invite you to subscribe in the bottom right hand side of the screen and hit the old like button. As well, I'd like to thank my favorite TES wiki, that is the UESP wiki, and thank them for their awesome info. Now let's get right into it. Here's how we're going to do this. Based on our selected profession, which we'll be using a blacksmith, I'm going to do a series of price checks and we'll try to get our very best rough estimate of an average NPC's income as a blacksmith. We will compare the prices of tools and then iron and steel swords, and I'm not going to include armor in this as it's a more specific niche of blacksmithing, and we'll be directly comparing a blacksmith in Solitude in Skyrim and Chedenhall in Oblivion, and we'll take into account the general foot traffic to determine who would do more sales. Now I'm going to be doing this with a level 4 character in Oblivion and a level 7 character in Skyrim, all with base unnegotiated prices, no skills that are going to help us get better prices. This is like the base what any average person would pay for stuff. And I found the results of this experiment really interesting, and I think you will too. To start, let's take a look at the differences between Oblivion and Skyrim's economies as a whole. For one, we have a 200-year difference between Oblivion and Skyrim. Now, since the Septum, the main currency of the Empire, is backed directly on the gold it's minted on, the value of the currency shouldn't have changed too much. Looking around online, I don't see any evidence that the size or metal content of each coin has changed in that 200 years. Now, at the start of the Oblivion crisis in the Elder Scrolls 4, the economy was pretty dang good, as Uriel Septim VII had guided the Empire to a bit of a golden age. 200 years later in Skyrim, Civil War had destroyed a lot of that golden age and the economy was much worse. Not to mention the disaster of the Red Mountain erupting in the beginning of the 4th era also kind of worked to weaken the economy of the whole empire. Skyrim got hit especially hard as they had to accept and put up with the fleeing refugees from the crisis, which taxed both Skyrim and created racial tensions between the Dunmer and Nords. Okay, let's begin with a general comparison. So if we start with our blacksmith in Chedenhall, we will go to a shop called the March Rider, and they charge 37 septims for an iron longsword. Now if we jump over and look at Solitude, we can see that the blacksmith in Solitude is charging a whopping 76 septims for an iron sword, almost exactly double the price of that in Chedenhall 200 years ago. This is a crazy jump in price, but it makes sense with the political and economic climate, but still, that's a hell of a jump. If we look at the price of a steel sword in Chedenhall now, they go for 83 gold, and again, 200 years later in Solitude, they go for 137 gold. Not as much, but still a heck of a jump. Now I'm gonna kind of compare apples to oranges here, but I still think it's a good comparison. Let's take a look at the repair hammer in Oblivion. The March Rider has them on sale for 19 gold. Now let's look at the pickaxe in Skyrim. It costs 15 gold. So obviously weapons have gone up steeply in price. And since Skyrim is generally a more dangerous place than Cyrodiil in the 3rd era, I can see how the demand would be there to justify the price jump. Now to get some sort of baseline comparison, if we look at the US, 43% of people report living in a household where there's a firearm. So if we take the population of Chedenhall, which is 60, plus the guards of course, and look at 43% of the population, that's 25.8 people. So if we assume half of them buy a new sword every year, that's 12.9 people. And though the guards carry silver weapons, I'm going to assume that they would use the March Rider as their supplier, and probably order new weapons, say once a year for their men. We'll use steel as our swords, since they probably get a bit of a discount anyways. Counting the guards around town and in the castle comes to about 15, and we can assume a night garrison of around another 10. Realistically, there's about 25 guards. So with all of that, distributing the sales of steel and iron to the public evenly, we get around 2,855 septums per year in weapon sales. Now if we assume about half the population buys a new hand tool once a quarter, we will use the hammer as our baseline. That's another 2,280 gold or septums a year. In total, 5,135 septums per year, or about 14.26 gold per day in an Elder Scrolls year. So now if we go and look at Home Depot, we can see that an S-Wing blacksmithing hammer, which is a very common smithing hammer, sells for also $19, which would put our conversion rate of USD to septums to about 1-to-1. So how is it possible that someone in the Elder Scrolls could make so little and yet live in a quote-unquote good economy? It's simple, and it's that there's a very low population in the game. It just doesn't add up to a realistic amount. If we take the typical city population between the 11th and 15th centuries in real life, of what I found online to be 8,000 to 12,000, and just assume 10,000, that same blacksmith, if they were the sole supplier in the city, would do more like 129,000 gold in weapon sales to the public. And I'm not even going to try to guess military sales. And then on top of that, they would do around 380,000 in tool sales. Not to mention, in a much larger city, there would be more specialty buyers. Simply put, there would be a much larger market available. So I think we need to take a step back and even the playing field for the Elder Scrolls universe to make more sense before we move on to a Skyrim income. So let's figure out a more accurate way to get the Oblivion currency value down first. I found a pretty good way to figure this out. If we take a look at all the available houses to purchase in Oblivion and average it out, we get an average cost of 11,000 septums per home. Now since the USD is close in value to the septum, the average home cost in the US is $218,000 as of 2018 according to Reader's Digest. So if we use this to equate values instead, we can see that our blacksmith at the March Rider makes more like 101,766 USD in sales per year adjusted. This makes a lot of sense as a small business for an economy that's doing well. So with that out of the way, let's see 200 years later how our Solitude blacksmith is doing. Now if we average out the home cost in Skyrim, we get 10,900 septums per house, which is surprisingly close to that of Oblivion's. We'll get an exchange rate in real estate value of 1 septum to 20 US dollars. Now this still makes things a little weird, since that would put the value of a Skyrim carrot at about 60 US dollars. But I guess the low cost of housing helps make up for it. Solitude's population is 85, and if we run the same calculation from before at Skyrim's population prices, we get a massive 5,370 septums in weapon sales and 2,550 septums in tool sales, but we can tack on an extra 500 for the dock and farm outside of the city and get a total of 3,050 septums per year in tool sales. At the going exchange rate, the blacksmith would do a gross amount of sales adjusted to USD of about 168,400 US dollars. Not bad. Now of course with both games we need to take into account the material costs, so this isn't going to be his take-home income, but he most likely does pretty well for himself and takes home about half to 3/4 of that amount. Finally, if the economy of Skyrim is supposed to be worse than that of Oblivion's, how come our Skyrim blacksmith makes more money? Well, we can explain this pretty easily. The cost of living. Let's look at some basic food costs from both games. A tomato in Oblivion, 4 septums. Skyrim, 12 septums. A cut of venison, Oblivion, 2 septums. Skyrim, 15 septums. A carrot, Oblivion 2 septums, Skyrim 3 septums. That's anywhere from 1.5 times as much to 7 times as much for food. So yes, the economy is legitimately worse in Skyrim, no doubt. Real estate is slightly lower because there are less buyers, but food is more expensive in Skyrim because 1, it's colder, and 2, the economy is obviously worse. So what do you guys think? I think this is a really good rough estimate to show what the creators of these games created for an economy. Now obviously the economy was designed sort of more around the player character, but I still think it's pretty interesting to look and see, yeah, Skyrim's economy is worse than Oblivion's economy. Or somebody in Oblivion can expect to make this much money, compared to the US dollar that is. Though we'll only ever get to see snapshots of this world through the different games that Bethesda has made, we still have a little bit of a better understanding now of the economic situation. So guys, thank you for watching. I hope you found this interesting. If you did, please subscribe in the bottom right hand corner of the screen and like the video. As well, if you want to leave a comment, I would love that. I read all my comments and I will definitely respond. So thank you, have a great day. This is JDog1025 FTW, and I'm peacing out.